A Hell's Angel found his granddaughter living in a shelter. Where is your $2 million trust fund? The rumble of tools against metal filled Charlie Mace's small garage as he worked on his cherished Harley-Davidson. Oil stained his weathered hands while the Montana summer sun beat down through the open garage door. His long gray beard, streaked with remnants of its original red color, caught the light as he leaned over the engine. "Come on, you stubborn piece of," he muttered, wrestling with a particularly difficult bolt. The familiar work usually brought him peace, but today something felt off. Maybe it was the storm clouds gathering in the distance, or maybe it was something else entirely. The sharp ring of his cell phone cut through the mechanical sounds. Charlie wiped his hands on an old rag and fished the phone from his jacket hanging nearby. The local area code flashed on the screen. "Yeah," he answered gruffly. "Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today." Now back to the story. "Mr. Mace," a woman's professional voice came through. "This is Officer Sarah Martinez from the Helena Police Department." Charlie's stomach dropped. Police calls never brought good news. "What's this about?" "Sir, we've located your granddaughter, Kelsey Mace. She's currently at the Helping Hands shelter in Helena." The wrench Charlie had been holding clattered to the concrete floor. "Kelsey? What do you mean located? She's supposed to be at that fancy school of hers. According to shelter staff, she's been there for nearly a week. She's safe," Officer Martinez added quickly. "But given that you're her legal guardian, we needed to contact you immediately." Charlie's mind raced. A week? His granddaughter had been living in a homeless shelter for a week, and he hadn't known? Guilt and anger churned his gut as he thought of Jessie, his daughter, and the promises he'd made when she died. "What's the address?" he demanded, already grabbing his truck keys from the workbench. The officer provided the details, which Charlie scrawled onto an old receipt with shaking hands. "Mr. Mace," Officer Martinez added, "she seems pretty shaken up. Whatever's going on, she needs support right now." Charlie ran his fingers through his beard, a nervous habit he'd never managed to break. "I'll be there in an hour," he said, his voice rough with emotion. After hanging up, Charlie stood in his garage for a moment, surrounded by the familiar tools and parts that had been his comfort for so many years. The half-finished Harley seemed to mock him now. Here he was, tinkering with machines while his granddaughter was out there alone. He quickly changed out of his oil-stained shirt into a cleaner one, though cleaner was relative given his wardrobe. The tattoos on his arms, faded remnants of his Hell's Angels days, stood out against his sun-weathered skin as he pulled on his leather jacket. The drive to Helena usually took about an hour and a half, but Charlie intended to make it in less. His old Ford pickup protested as he turned the key, but the engine caught and roared to life. As he pulled out of his driveway, the first few drops of rain began to fall. On the highway, Charlie's mind wandered to the last time he'd seen Kelsey. She'd been quiet, withdrawn, but he'd chalked it up to normal teenage behavior. Should he have noticed something was wrong? The steering wheel creaked under his tightening grip. "Damn it, Kelsey," he muttered to himself as he pushed the truck faster. "What's gotten into you, kid?" The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm as the rain increased, matching the pounding of Charlie's heart. Each mile marker that passed only increased his anxiety. What could have driven her to a homeless shelter? Why hadn't she called him? He had so many questions, and each one felt like a weight on his chest. The fluorescent lights of the Helping Hands shelter buzzed overhead as Charlie pushed through the front doors. The sudden shift from Montana's gray afternoon to the harsh indoor lighting made him squint. His boots, still wet from the rain, squeaked against the linoleum floor. Heads turned as he entered. Charlie was used to this reaction. His 6'4" frame, leather jacket, and long beard tended to draw stares. A young volunteer behind the front desk straightened up, her eyes widening slightly. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. "Looking for my granddaughter, Kelsey Mace." Charlie tried to soften his naturally gruff tone. "Police call me about her." The volunteer nodded in recognition. "Oh yes, Officer Martinez mentioned you'd be coming. Follow me, please." She led Charlie through a maze of folding tables where people sat eating late lunches from plastic trays. The smell of institutional food, something like beef stew, hung in the air. Groups of people huddled together, talking in low voices. Some watched Charlie pass with wary eyes. "She's been keeping to herself mostly," the volunteer explained as they walked. "Barely touches her food. We tried getting her to talk to our counselor, but..." She trailed off with a small shrug. They reached a quieter area at the back of the shelter. There, in a corner near a window, streaked with rain, sat Kelsey. Charlie's heart clenched at the sight of her. She looked so small, hunched over in an oversized sweater that had seen better days. Her dark hair hung limply around her face, and when she looked up at their approach, Charlie saw the purple-yellow bruise blooming across her left cheekbone. "Jesus," he breathed, his fist clenching involuntarily. The volunteer touched his arm lightly. "I'll give you two some privacy," she said, retreating back toward the front. Charlie approached slowly, like he used to approach spooked horses in his younger days. Kelsey watched him with tired eyes, her face a mask of carefully controlled emotion. He pulled up a plastic chair, wincing at the scraping sound it made against the floor. "Hey, kid," he said softly. Kelsey's eyes dropped to her hands, which were folded tightly in her lap. "Hi." Up close, Charlie could see how pale she was, how dark the circles were under her eyes. Her clothes were wrinkled like she'd been sleeping in them for days. The sight made his chest ache with a mixture of worry and anger. "Want to tell me what's going on?" he asked, trying to keep his voice level. "You're supposed to be at Bradford Academy." Kelsey's shoulders tensed. "I left," she said simply. "Left?" Charlie leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "When?" "About a week ago." The words hung in the air between them. Charlie felt his jaw tighten. "A week," he repeated. "You've been here for a week? Why didn't you call me?" Kelsey shifted in her chair, but didn't answer. Her eyes remained fixed on her hands, which were picking at a loose thread on her sweater. "Kelsey." Charlie's voice grew harder with concern. "Look at me." She didn't. Instead, she seemed to curl further into herself, as if trying to disappear into the oversized sweater. Charlie could feel his frustration building, mixing with his worry and confusion. The bruise on her face seemed to mock him, evidence of something gone terribly wrong while he'd been obliviously working on his bike back home. "Been staying here the whole time," he pressed when she remained silent. A small nod was her only response. Charlie took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing thoughts. The buzz of the fluorescent lights seemed to grow louder in the silence between them. He'd never been good at this, the gentle approach, the careful words. But looking at Kelsey's fragile form, he knew he had to try. "Listen, kid," he said, softening his voice. "I know I'm probably the last person you wanted to see right now, but you've got me worried sick." Kelsey's shoulders hunched a little more. She glanced up briefly, then away again, as if the sight of his concerned face was too much to bear. Her fingers kept working at that loose thread, pulling it longer and longer. "I'm not mad," Charlie continued, even though part of him was not at her, but at whatever had driven her to this place. "Just want to understand what's going on. Maybe I can help." A bitter laugh escaped her lips, barely more than a whisper. "You can't help," she said, her voice rough from disuse. "Nobody can." Charlie shifted in his chair, the plastic creaking under his weight. Around them, the shelter's usual sounds continued. Distant conversations, the clinking of dishes, footsteps on linoleum. But in their corner, time seemed to stand still. "Try me," he said. When she didn't respond, he added, "At least let me take you home. Get you cleaned up, some decent food in you." Kelsey's head shot up, panic flashing across her face. "I can't go back there," she said quickly. "I won't." "Back where?" "My place." "No, to school. To any of it." Her voice cracked slightly. "I'm not going back." Charlie leaned back, studying her face. The bruise looked worse every time he glanced at it. "Okay," he said carefully. "We don't have to decide anything right now. But you can't stay here." Kelsey's eyes darted around the room, like a trapped animal looking for escape routes. Her hands were trembling now, and she shoved them into her sweater pockets to hide them. "They'll make me go back," she whispered. "Who will?" "Everyone. The school. The trustees." She swallowed hard. "They always do." Charlie felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Did someone at school do that to your face?" The silence stretched between them. A tear rolled down Kelsey's cheek, but she wiped it away quickly, as if angry at its existence. They said I didn't belong there, she finally said, her voice barely audible. That I was just charity case trash. That my mom was... She stopped, her breath hitching. The other students? Charlie prompted gently. Kelsey nodded. At first it was just words. Notes in my locker. Messages online. But then, her hand drifted up to touch her bruised cheek. I couldn't stay there anymore. I won't go back. Charlie's hands clenched into fists, but he forced them to relax. Getting angry wouldn't help right now, no matter how much he wanted to hunt down whoever had hurt his granddaughter. Okay, he said simply. You don't have to go back. Kelsey looked at him then, really looked at him for the first time since he'd arrived. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but suspicious, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. You mean it? She asked. Yeah, kid. I mean it. Charlie's old pickup truck rumbled down the dusty Montana road, its worn suspension creaking with every bump. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the pines, painting stripes across the cracked dashboard. Kelsey sat huddled against the passenger door, her backpack clutched tightly to her chest like a shield. The silence between them felt heavy, broken only by the engine's steady growl and the occasional rattle of loose tools in the truck bed. Charlie kept stealing glances at his granddaughter, noting how small she looked in the oversized seat. You must be hungry, he said, trying to keep his voice gentle despite its natural gruffness. We can stop for something if you want. Kelsey shook her head, still staring out the window at the passing landscape. Charlie drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, choosing his next words carefully. Listen, kid, I don't understand something here. Your mom set up that trust fund to take care of you. $2 million. That's what I signed for as a witness. Why are you living in a shelter when you've got that kind of money? Kelsey's shoulders tensed visibly. She pressed herself further against the door, as if trying to put more distance between them in the confined space. I can't access it, she mumbled, so quietly Charlie had to strain to hear her over the engine noise. What do you mean you can't access it? Charlie's brow furrowed. That money was meant for your education, your living expenses. Your mom made sure of that. Kelsey's fingers tightened around her backpack straps until her knuckles went white. Mom changed it, she said, her voice cracking. Before she died. Charlie's hands gripped the steering wheel harder. Change what exactly? Everything. The word came out as half-sob. Kelsey finally turned to look at him, her eyes brimming with tears. She changed the will. I found out after the funeral. The trustees told me I couldn't touch any of it anymore. Charlie pulled the truck over to the side of the road, gravel crunching under the tires. He turned to face his granddaughter fully. That doesn't make any sense. Your mom fought tooth and nail to set up that trust fund for you. I know. Kelsey burst out, tears now streaming down her face. I don't understand either. One day, everything was fine, and then she got sick, and suddenly there were all these changes, and now I can't access anything, and nobody will tell me why. Her words tumbled out faster and faster, like a dam breaking. The school keeps sending bills, and the trustees just say everything's been legally altered, and I don't know where the money went or why Mom would do this to me. Charlie reached out instinctively to comfort her, but Kelsey flinched away, curling in on herself as she continued to cry. His hand hung in the air for a moment before dropping heavily to his lap. When exactly did your mom make these changes? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the anger building in his chest. Right before she went in for that surgery, Kelsey whispered, wiping at her tears with her sleeve. The one she never came back from. She looked up at Charlie, her eyes red and desperate. I don't understand, Grandpa. Why would she leave me with nothing? Why would she change everything at the last minute? Charlie stared out at the empty road ahead, his mind racing. The Jessie he knew would never have left her daughter helpless like this. Something wasn't adding up, and he intended to find out what. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Charlie's cabin, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. He sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by cardboard boxes he'd pulled from the back of his closet. Each one contained fragments of Jessie's life, the few pieces he'd managed to hold onto over the years. Charlie rubbed his tired eyes, the coffee in his mug long since gone cold. He'd barely slept, his mind churning with questions about Jesse and the trust fund. In the guest room down the hall, Kelsey was still sleeping, exhausted from yesterday's emotions. "All right, Jesse," he muttered, pulling another box closer. "What were you hiding?" His calloused hands, more used to working on motorcycles than handling papers, carefully sorted through old photographs and letters. Each item stirred memories. Jesse's high school graduation, where she'd barely acknowledged his presence, her wedding invitation, which he'd received but never attended, sparse Christmas cards that grew fewer over the years. A small leather-bound photo album caught his attention. Inside, he found pictures of Kelsey growing up, school portraits and birthday snapshots that Jesse had sent sporadically. Charlie's chest tightened as he traced Kelsey's smile in a photo where she was missing her front teeth. The same smile he hadn't seen since picking her up from the shelter. At the bottom of one box, beneath a stack of old newspapers, he found a manila envelope. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it, recognizing Jesse's neat handwriting on the front. Inside were legal documents, most of them related to the trust fund's original setup. Charlie spread the papers across the table, trying to make sense of the legal jargon. His reading glasses perched precariously on his nose as he sifted through document after document. Bank statements showed regular deposits. Investment reports indicated steady growth, and everything seemed normal until about 6 months before Jesse's death. Then he found it, a letter from a law firm he didn't recognize. The paper was creased, as if Jesse had folded and unfolded it many times. Charlie's eyes narrowed as he read. "Dear Mrs. Mace, regarding your inquiry about the proposed amendments to the trust fund agreement, we must advise caution. While we understand your concerns about potential interference from interested parties, any changes to the current arrangement could have significant implications for your daughter's financial security. The dispute over control of the trust remains unresolved. Until we can fully address the legal challenges presented by the other parties involved, we strongly recommend maintaining the current structure." The letter continued with vague references to ongoing negotiations and contested claims, but offered no clear explanation of what was really happening. It was dated just 2 weeks before Jesse's fatal surgery. Charlie's fist clenched, crumpling the edge of the paper. "Damn it, Jesse," he growled. "What kind of mess did you get yourself into?" He searched through the remaining papers, hoping to find more letters or documents that might explain what had happened, but there was nothing. Just that one cryptic letter, raising more questions than it answered. Who were these interested parties? What kind of interference had Jesse been worried about? The sound of floorboards creaking in the hallway made him look up. Kelsey stood in the doorway, her hair tousled from sleep, looking small and vulnerable in her oversized sweater. Charlie quickly gathered the papers, tucking them back into the envelope. Whatever was going on with that trust fund, he needed more information before he could tell Kelsey what he'd found. The aroma of bacon and coffee drifted through the small cabin, pulling Kelsey from her restless sleep. She blinked, taking a moment to remember where she was. The guest room was simple, just a bed, a dresser, and a small window overlooking the Montana mountains. But there was something comforting about its plainness. She pulled on her sweater and padded down the hallway, following the sounds of sizzling and the gentle clink of plates. In the kitchen, Charlie stood at the stove, his large frame seeming out of place as he carefully flipped pancakes. His leather vest was draped over a chair, replaced by a faded flannel shirt. "Morning," he said gruffly, not turning around. "Sit down. Food's almost ready." Kelsey slid into a wooden chair at the small table, watching as Charlie expertly slid pancakes onto a plate. The table had been cleared of the papers and boxes she'd glimpsed earlier. In their place were 2 settings with mismatched plates and silverware. "You didn't have to," she started, but Charlie cut her off with a wave of his spatula. "Course I did. Can't have you going hungry." He set a plate in front of her, piled high with pancakes, bacon, and scrambled eggs. "Might not be what you're used to, but it'll fill you up." The gesture, so simple yet unexpected, made Kelsey's throat tight. She couldn't remember the last time someone had made her breakfast. At school, it was always cafeteria food. At home, well, Home had been lonely for a long time. Charlie sat across from her with his own plate, pouring syrup over his pancakes. They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the scrape of forks and the distant call of birds outside. "Mom never cooked," Kelsey said suddenly, surprising herself. She poked at her eggs with her fork. She was always too busy or worried or something. Charlie's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down slowly, giving Kelsey his full attention. "She used to order takeout a lot," Kelsey continued, the words spilling out now. "And when she was home, she was always on the phone with lawyers or financial advisors. Sometimes I'd hear her crying in her office late at night." Charlie's weathered face softened slightly. "Your mom, she had a lot on her plate. The family, Dad's family, they were always pushing her to do things their way. Fancy parties, charity events, business dinners." Kelsey's voice grew bitter. "She hated it, but she said we had to keep up appearances, that it was important for my future." "And the money?" Charlie asked carefully. "The trust fund." Kelsey's shoulders slumped. "She never talked about it directly with me, but I could tell it worried her. She'd get these letters, and her hands would shake while reading them. Sometimes she'd mutter about protecting what's mine when she thought I couldn't hear." Charlie nodded slowly, his coffee cup forgotten in his hand. "Did she ever mention anyone specific? Anyone who was giving her trouble?" "No." Kelsey shook her head. "She tried to keep me out of it all. Said I shouldn't have to worry about adult problems." She pushed her half-eaten breakfast away. "But I wasn't stupid. I knew something was wrong." She got more and more distant, especially in the last few months before. Her voice trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Charlie's phone buzzed in his pocket as he was cleaning up the breakfast dishes. Kelsey had gone back to her room, saying she needed some time alone. He dried his hands on a dish towel and checked the caller ID. Pete Harrison, an old friend who'd helped him with legal trouble back in his Hells Angels days. "Pete, been a while," Charlie said, stepping onto the front porch to keep his voice down. "Charlie, glad I caught you." Pete's voice crackled through the speaker. "Listen, I've been doing some digging about Jesse's will, like you asked." Charlie leaned against the porch railing, his eyes scanning the tree line. "What did you find?" "There's something weird here, Charlie. I found another will, a second one. Jesse signed it just 3 days before she died." Charlie's grip tightened on the phone. "A second will? Why didn't anyone mention this before?" "Because it was never filed properly. Found it buried in some paperwork at the county clerk's office." Pete paused, papers rustling in the background. "I can bring it over. You need to see this for yourself." An hour later, Pete's silver sedan pulled up to Charlie's cabin. Pete stepped out, briefcase in hand, looking exactly as Charlie remembered, short, balding, with thick glasses and a rumpled suit. They shook hands, and Charlie led him inside to the kitchen table. "Where's your granddaughter?" Pete asked, glancing around. "In her room. We can talk here." Charlie pulled out a chair. "What V you got?" Pete opened his briefcase and pulled out several documents. The first will, the one everyone knows about, gives control of Kelsey's trust fund to her father and his family until she turns 25. He spread out more papers. But this second will tells a different story. Charlie leaned forward, squinting at the legal text. "What's it say?" Jesse was trying to protect the money. Pete pointed to specific paragraphs. "She wanted to create an independent trust with you as co-trustee alongside a neutral bank. The money would have been completely out of her in-laws' reach. Why didn't this will stand?" Charlie's voice was tight with frustration. Pete adjusted his glasses. "Because she died before it could be properly filed and notarized. The timing, it's suspicious, Charlie. She signs this will on Monday, goes in for routine surgery on Thursday, and..." He trailed off, letting Charlie fill in the blanks. Charlie stared at the papers, his jaw clenched. The second will showed Jesse's desperate attempt to protect her daughter's future. But something had gone wrong. Terribly wrong. "There's more," Pete said quietly. "Look at these notes she attached." He slid over a handwritten page. She was gathering evidence about her in-laws' business practices. She believed they were trying to gain control of Kelsey's trust fund to cover up their own financial problems. Charlie read through Jesse's hurried writing, feeling a mix of pride and pain. His daughter had been fighting back, trying to protect Kelsey, but her efforts had made her vulnerable. "This changes everything," Charlie muttered, spreading the documents across the table. But also leaves us with more questions than answers. Pete nodded grimly. The timing of her death, the missing paperwork, the family's sudden control over the money. None of it adds up, Charlie. Charlie gathered the papers carefully, his mind racing. Jesse had tried to do the right thing, but somehow that choice had put everything and everyone at risk. Now, sitting in his kitchen with the evidence of her final fight spread before him, he felt further from the truth than ever. Charlie parked his weathered pickup truck between two shiny luxury cars in the visitors' lot of the Mace Financial Building. The modern glass structure towered above him, reflecting the morning sun. He tugged at the collar of his cleanest flannel shirt, feeling out of place among the well-dressed business people hurrying past. Inside the lobby, the security guard eyed his tattoos and beard with suspicion. Charlie approached the front desk, where a young receptionist looked up from her computer. "I'm here to see Richard Mace," Charlie said, trying to keep his voice level. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her perfectly manicured nails hovering over her keyboard. "Tell him Charlie Mace is here, his daughter's father-in-law." The receptionist made a quick call, her eyes widening slightly as she listened to the response. "Mr. Mace will see you. 15th floor, suite 1502. The elevator ride gave Charlie time to collect his thoughts. His hands were sweaty, and he could feel his heart pounding. The papers Pete had shown him were tucked safely in his jacket pocket. Richard's office was exactly what Charlie expected, all mahogany and leather, with a view of the city that probably cost more than Charlie's house. Richard sat behind an enormous desk, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than Charlie's motorcycle. "Charlie," Richard said, not bothering to stand. "This is unexpected." His voice was smooth and controlled, but his eyes were cold. "We need to talk about Kelsey's trust fund," Charlie said, remaining standing. He wasn't about to sit down like some subordinate in Richard's kingdom. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I wasn't aware there was anything to discuss. The arrangements were all made according to Jesse's wishes." "That's not what the second will says." Charlie pulled out the papers and placed them on Richard's desk, the one Jesse signed right before she died. For just a moment, Richard's polished facade cracked. His eyes flickered to the documents, then back to Charlie. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really?" Charlie leaned forward, placing his hands on the desk. "Because according to these papers, Jesse was trying to protect that money from your family. She wanted to make sure Kelsey had control of it." Richard straightened his tie, regaining his composure. "Mr. Mace, I appreciate your concern, but you're mistaken. The will that was executed is the only valid one. Everything else is just speculation." "Speculation?" Charlie's voice rose. "Your daughter is living in my cabin because she couldn't access her own money. Money that was meant for her future." "Kelsey is a child," Richard said dismissively. "She doesn't understand financial matters. The trust fund is being managed appropriately. By you and your family?" Charlie challenged. "The same people Jesse was investigating." Richard's smile turned cold. "I think we're done here. If you have concerns about the trust, you can take them up with our lawyers." He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Susan, please show Mr. Mace out." "This isn't over," Charlie said, gathering the papers. "Jesse was trying to protect our granddaughter, and you know it." "Good day, Mr. Mace," Richard said, already turning his attention to his computer screen. A security guard appeared at the door. Charlie gave Richard one last hard look before turning to leave. The man's dismissive attitude and quick denials only confirmed what Charlie had suspected. Richard knew more than he was letting on, and he was definitely hiding something. Kelsey sat curled up on Charlie's worn leather couch, flipping through an old motorcycle magazine without really seeing the pages. The afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows of the cabin, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. She could hear Charlie's heavy footsteps on the front porch as he paced back and forth, his voice growing louder with each passing moment. "Listen here, Richard," Charlie growled into the phone. "You can't just sweep this under the rug. That money belongs to Kelsey." Kelsey's fingers tightened on the magazine pages, crinkling them. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but Charlie's voice carried easily through the thin cabin walls. "Don't give me that legal mumbo-jumbo," Charlie continued. "You haven't even checked on her since Jesse died. What kind of father? Kelsey stood up abruptly, the magazine falling to the floor with a soft thud. She marched to the front door and yanked it open, startling Charlie mid-sentence. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Why are you talking to him?" Charlie lowered the phone, his weathered face softening at the sight of her distress. "I'll call you back," he muttered into the phone before hanging up. "Kelsey, honey," he started. "Don't." She wrapped her arms around herself, taking a step back. "You had no right to call him. No right to dig into all of this." Charlie's massive frame seemed to deflate as he sank onto the porch swing. "I'm trying to help you, kid. What your father's doing with that trust fund, it ain't right. Nothing about any of this is right." Tears welled up in Kelsey's eyes. "Mom's gone and Dad." Her voice cracked. "He stopped being my dad long before she died." Charlie reached out toward her, but she shook her head, backing away until she hit the porch railing. "When was the last time you saw him?" Charlie asked quietly. Kelsey wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her oversized sweater. 3 months before Mom died. He came to one of my school concerts." She let out a bitter laugh. "He stayed for exactly 15 minutes, then had to leave for some important business meeting. And after Jesse passed, he sent his assistant to the funeral." Kelsey's voice was barely above a whisper. "Said he was stuck in Tokyo on business. He didn't even call me himself." She slid down to sit on the wooden porch floor, drawing her knees up to her chest. "Mom was always making excuses for him, saying he was busy providing for us. But she was just as bad." Charlie remained silent, letting her speak. "She was always at charity events, social functions, trying to keep up appearances." Kelsey's words came faster now, tumbling out like water from a broken dam. "When I needed help with homework or had nightmares, it was always the nanny who came. When I made honor roll, Mom was too busy planning some gala to come to the ceremony." Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs. "And now they're both gone. Mom's dead and Dad." She looked up at Charlie, her eyes red and filled with pain. "Dad might as well be. He abandoned me long ago." They both did. Charlie sat there, his large hands clasped together, looking more helpless than Kelsey had ever seen him. The afternoon light caught the silver in his beard, and for a moment, he looked older than his years. "I just don't understand," Kelsey whispered. "Was I not enough? Did they not love me enough to stay?" Charlie watched Kelsey for a long moment, then pushed himself up from the porch swing. "Wait here," he said, disappearing into the cabin. A few minutes later, he returned with a battered cardboard box. "Your mom would probably kill me for keeping these," he said, settling back down and placing the box between them. Kelsey wiped her eyes, curiosity temporarily overcoming her distress. Charlie pulled out a stack of worn photographs, handling them with surprising gentleness for such large, calloused hands. "Here," he said, passing one to Kelsey. "That's your mom when she was about your age." Kelsey took the photo carefully. It showed a teenage Jessie, her long brown hair in braids, sitting on the back of Charlie's motorcycle. She was grinning widely, something Kelsey had rarely seen her mother do in recent years. "She loved riding with me back then," Charlie said softly. "Before all the society stuff, before she met your father." He shuffled through more photos. "Here's one from her 16th birthday." The image showed Jessie blowing out candles on a lopsided homemade cake, Charlie's massive arm around her shoulders. Both were laughing. "Mom looks so different," Kelsey said, tracing the edge of the photo. "So happy." She was, Charlie nodded. "Smart as a whip, too. Had big dreams of becoming a lawyer." He pulled out another photo, this one showing Jessie in a high school graduation gown. Top of her class. Kelsey frowned, but she never became a lawyer. She just did charity work and planned parties. "No, she didn't," Charlie agreed, his voice heavy with old regret. "Things changed after she met your father. His family had different expectations for what a proper society wife should be." They went through more photos. Jessie at the beach, Jessie reading under a tree, Jessie helping Charlie work on his bike. Each image showed a side of her mother that Kelsey had never known existed. "She used to write poetry," Charlie said, pulling out a worn notebook. "Pretty good at it, too. Always carrying this thing around, scribbling away." Kelsey took the notebook, opening it carefully. Her mother's neat handwriting filled the pages with verses about freedom, dreams, and wild, open roads. I don't understand, Kelsey said, her voice catching. If she was so different before, why did she change? Why did she let them change her? Charlie sighed, running a hand through his beard. Your mother, she thought she was doing the right thing. Thought she was securing a better future than what I could give her. But she was miserable, Kelsey said, looking at another photo of young, carefree Jessie. And she made sure I knew to be careful around Dad. She always said. Kelsey paused, realization dawning on her face. She always warned me about how manipulative he could be, how he could make anything sound reasonable, even when it wasn't. Charlie leaned forward, his expression intent. What do you mean? She'd pull me aside sometimes, especially after Dad had promised me something. Kelsey's fingers tightened on the photos. She'd remind me to read everything carefully, to never sign anything without understanding it completely. She looked up at Charlie, her eyes wide. I never really understood why she was so insistent about it. But now, with everything that's happened with the trust fund, her voice trailed off as the pieces started falling into place. You think your trust fund was part of his manipulation all along? Charlie asked gently. Mom must have thought so, Kelsey whispered. Why else would she have warned me so many times? The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the cabin windows as Charlie and Kelsey sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by old photos and memories. The comfortable silence between them felt different now, less tense than before. Charlie cleared his throat. Look, kid, I know I'm not exactly what you'd call traditional grandfather material. He gestured to his tattooed arms and leather vest. But I want to help figure this mess out. Kelsey nodded, straightening the stack of photos. I think Mom would want us to work together. She paused, then added quietly, and I want to know the truth about what happened to her money, my money. Then we need to start at the source, Charlie said, pulling out a worn notebook. Your father's family estate. That's where all the paperwork will be kept, right? The mansion. Kelsey wrinkled her nose. I haven't been there since Mom's funeral. Grandmother always made me feel like I didn't belong. Charlie's jaw tightened at the mention of Kelsey's grandmother. Well, you have every right to be there. It's your family, too, whether they like it or not. We could go tomorrow, Kelsey suggested, a hint of excitement creeping into her voice. Dad's usually at the office all day, and Grandmother has her charity meetings on Thursdays. Smart thinking. Charlie nodded approvingly. We'll need to be careful, though. Your father's family. They're not the type to play fair. Kelsey stood up, pushing her chair back. I should get my things ready. I still have some stuff there from before. Her voice wavered slightly. Charlie watched as she disappeared into the spare room he'd cleared out for her. Through the open door, he could see her pulling out an old backpack, methodically sorting through its contents. Suddenly, Kelsey froze. Charlie, her voice sounded strange. I think you need to see this. He pushed himself up from the table, joints creaking, and made his way to her room. Kelsey sat cross-legged on the floor, holding a sealed envelope. The paper was slightly yellowed, and the handwriting on the front was unmistakably Jessie's. It was tucked in the lining of my backpack, Kelsey explained, her hands shaking slightly. I've had this bag since before Mom died. I never noticed it before. Charlie sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. What does it say? With trembling fingers, Kelsey carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. Her eyes scanned the page, widening as she read. My dearest Kelsey, she read aloud. If you're reading this, then things haven't gone as I hoped. There are things you need to know about our family, your father's family. The trust fund isn't what it seems. Don't trust anyone who claims to have your best interests at heart, especially not your grandmother. The key to understanding everything is in the blue room at the estate, behind the portrait of your great-grandfather. Kelsey looked up at Charlie, her face pale. There's more. She mentioned something about documents hidden in the estate's library and warnings about the family's business dealings. She swallowed hard. She knew something was wrong, Charlie. She was trying to tell me. Charlie reached for the letter, but Kelsey wasn't finished. Remember what I taught you about being careful with signatures and documents. Your grandmother and father have ways of making things disappear. Keep this letter safe and show it only to someone you trust completely. Kelsey's voice cracked on the last words. The iron gates of the Mace family estate loomed before them, ornate and imposing against the morning sky. Charlie parked his truck around the corner, out of sight from the main house. The contrast between his weathered vehicle and the manicured grounds couldn't have been starker. "You sure about the staff schedule?" Charlie whispered as they crept along the property's edge, keeping close to the carefully trimmed hedges. Kelsey nodded, her face set with determination. "Thursday mornings are when Maria, the housekeeper, does the grocery shopping. The gardener only comes on Mondays and Fridays." She led them toward a side entrance, hidden behind a mass of climbing roses. The key was exactly where Kelsey remembered, tucked behind a loose brick near the kitchen door. Her hands trembled slightly as she fitted it into the lock. Inside, the kitchen gleamed with expensive appliances and marble countertops. Charlie fell out of place, his heavy boots too loud on the polished floor. They moved carefully through the house, Kelsey leading the way up the grand staircase. "The blue room's on the third floor," she whispered. "It used to be great-grandfather's study." Their footsteps were muffled by thick carpeting as they climbed higher. Family portraits lined the walls, generations of stern-faced Maces looking down at them with painted disapproval. Charlie noticed how none of them smiled. The blue room earned its name honestly. Everything from the wallpaper to the heavy drapes was decorated in various shades of deep blue. A massive portrait dominated one wall. Kelsey's great-grandfather, looking as severe in death as his descendants did in life. "Help me with this," Kelsey said, moving toward the portrait. Together, they carefully lifted it from its hooks. Behind it, the wallpaper showed a slightly different shade, except for one square section that looked newer than the rest. Charlie ran his fingers along the edges of the section, feeling for any gaps. "There's something here," he murmured. With gentle pressure, the panel popped open, revealing a small door set into the wall. Inside was a room no bigger than a closet, lined with shelves. Boxes and folders filled every available space, each labeled with dates and names. The musty smell of old paper filled the air. "Look at this." Kelsey pulled out a folder marked with her name. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were documents, dozens of them, detailing her trust fund. But these weren't copies she'd seen before. Charlie leaned in, his expression darkening as he read. "These are the original documents," he growled. "The ones your father showed you were fakes." Kelsey's face went pale as she flipped through the pages. "The signatures. Mom's signature on the documents Dad showed me. It was forged." Her voice cracked. "They changed everything after she died. The trust fund was supposed to come to me directly, but that..." She couldn't finish the sentence. More folders revealed the extent of the deception. Bank statements showed systematic transfers of money from Kelsey's trust fund to offshore accounts. Legal documents bore signatures that didn't match Jesse's handwriting on her letter. Everything had been carefully documented and hidden away, a paper trail of betrayal. "They didn't just take my money," Kelsey whispered, staring at the evidence in her hands. "They rewrote Mom's whole will. They erased everything she tried to protect me from." Charlie's fists clenched as he looked at the stack of damning papers. The truth was here, preserved in ink and paper, telling a story of greed and manipulation that went deeper than either of them had imagined. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the blue room's windows as Charlie and Kelsey sat on the dusty floor, surrounded by damning evidence. Document after document revealed a carefully orchestrated plan that had begun even before Jesse's death. "Look at these dates," Charlie said, his voice rough with anger. He pointed to a series of letters between Richard and his family's lawyers. "They started planning this 3 months before your mother passed away." Kelsey's hands trembled as she read through another stack of papers. "They knew she was sick," she whispered. "They knew, and they were already figuring out how to take everything from me." Her voice cracked on the last words. Charlie picked up a legal brief dated just days after Jesse's death. The language was complex, but the intent was clear. Richard's family had immediately moved to challenge the original trust fund arrangements, claiming Jesse had been mentally unstable in her final months. "That's a lie," Kelsey said, her voice rising. Mom was tired and worried, but she wasn't unstable. She knew exactly what she was doing. She grabbed another folder, this one containing medical reports. "See?" Her doctor's notes show she was completely clear-headed until the end. Charlie's jaw clenched as he read through more documents. There were emails between Richard and his father, discussing ways to protect the family interests by gaining control of Kelsey's inheritance. They spoke about her as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience, an obstacle to their financial goals. They even planned how to keep me away from you, Kelsey said, holding up another letter. Richard told the lawyers that you were dangerous, that your background made you unfit to be anywhere near the family. She looked at Charlie, tears welling in her eyes. But you're the only one who's actually tried to help me. Charlie's weathered hands carefully gathered the papers that proved the family's deception. Each document was another knife in the back of his daughter's memory, another betrayal of the granddaughter he was only now getting to know. The trust fund wasn't just money, Kelsey continued, her voice hollow. Mom set it up so I could go to college anywhere I wanted, so I could travel and learn about the world. She wanted me to be independent. She picked up a modified version of the trust agreement, dated after Jesse's death. But they changed everything. Under their version, I can't touch any of it without Richard's approval until I'm 25. The reality of the situation settled over them like a heavy blanket. The very people who should have protected Kelsey, her father, her grandparents, her extended family, had conspired to control her future, to bend it to their will regardless of what Jesse had wanted for her daughter. Charlie watched as Kelsey's face crumpled, the weight of the betrayal finally hitting her full force. She hugged her knees to her chest, making herself small, just like she had at the homeless shelter. "They're my family," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They're supposed to love me. How could they do this?" Charlie moved closer, his large frame casting a protective shadow over his granddaughter. In that moment, he wasn't the ex-biker with a troubled past. He was simply a grandfather watching his grandchild's heart break. "Listen to me, kid," he said, his gruff voice gentler than usual. "What they did, that's not family. That's not love. But I promise you this. I'm going to fight for you. We're going to make this right, no matter what it takes." The law office of Marcus Bennett smelled like old leather and dusty books. Charlie shifted uncomfortably in his chair, feeling out of place in his worn jeans and motorcycle boots. Beside him, Kelsey sat straight-backed, her hands folded neatly in her lap, looking every bit the private school student she used to be. Marcus, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and salt and pepper hair, spread the documents across his mahogany desk. "Your mother was very thorough, Kelsey," he said, adjusting his glasses. "She came to see me several times in the months before her death." Charlie leaned forward, his large frame making the leather chair creak. "What exactly did she tell you?" Jesse knew Richard's family would try something like this, Marcus explained, pulling out a thick folder. She left detailed records of their attempts to pressure her about the trust fund. Phone calls, emails, even recorded conversations. Kelsey's eyes widened. "Mom recorded them?" Marcus nodded, his expression grim. "Your mother might have seemed passive, but she was quietly building a case. She suspected they would try to manipulate the trust after her death." Charlie rubbed his beard thoughtfully. "So what can we do about it?" "There are several legal angles we can pursue," Marcus said, pulling out another document. "First, we can challenge the validity of the changes made after Jesse's death. The timing alone raises red flags. Second, we have evidence that Richard's family used coercion and false claims about Jesse's mental state. But will it be enough?" Kelsey asked, her voice small but determined. Marcus spread his hands. "It won't be easy. Richard's family has money and influence. They'll fight hard. But," he paused, pulling out one final document. "This might be our ace in the hole." It was a letter dated just days before Jesse's death. In it, she detailed everything: the family's threats, their manipulation, their plans to control Kelsey's future. She had signed it and had it notarized. "Your mother knew what she was doing," Marcus said softly. "She wanted to protect you, Kelsey. She just ran out of time." Charlie watched as Kelsey read the letter, tears forming in her eyes. Her mother's last act had been to try to protect her, even if she hadn't succeeded. "What's our next step?" Charlie asked, his voice gruff with emotion. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "We file a lawsuit." challenge the current arrangement. Present evidence of manipulation and coercion. Request that the original terms of the trust be reinstated. How long will it take? Kelsey asked. Months, maybe longer, Marcus admitted. These cases can drag on, especially when there's this much money involved. Richard's family will use every delay tactic they can think of. Charlie placed a reassuring hand on Kelsey's shoulder. We got time, kid, and we've got truth on our side. Marcus gathered the documents into a neat pile. I should warn you both, this won't be pleasant. They'll try to discredit you, Charlie. They'll bring up your past with the Hells Angels. They'll try to paint Kelsey as an unstable teenager who ran away from school. Let them try, Charlie growled. We're filing first thing Monday morning, Marcus said, reaching for a stack of forms. I'll need both of you to sign these. It's going to be a long battle, but Jesse left us the weapons we need to fight it. As they began signing the papers, Kelsey looked up at Charlie. Are you sure you want to do this? They're going to say terrible things about you. Charlie's weathered face softened. Kid, I've been called every name in the book. What matters is making this right. Your mom tried to protect you. Now it's my turn. Charlie's morning routine was interrupted by the sound of a newspaper hitting his front porch. He wouldn't have bothered with it, except Kelsey's gas from the kitchen made him look up from his coffee. Charlie, you need to see this, she said, her voice trembling. The front page of the local paper showed a grainy photo of Charlie from his Hells Angels days, leather-clad and surrounded by other bikers. The headline read, Local Teen's Guardian, a dangerous past revealed. Charlie's weathered hands gripped the paper tightly. The article was a masterpiece of insinuation, bringing up every dark chapter of his life while carefully avoiding outright lies. It mentioned his connection to the motorcycle gang, hinted at possible criminal activities, and questioned his ability to care for a teenage girl. This is Richard written all over it, Charlie muttered, his jaw clenched. Kelsey paced the kitchen, her arms wrapped around herself. They're making you sound like some kind of monster. The phone rang, making them both jump. Charlie answered it, listening as Marcus, their lawyer, detailed the latest development. Richard had filed a counterpetition, challenging Charlie's guardianship based on his questionable character and dangerous associations. The whole town's talking about it. Mrs. Peterson, their elderly neighbor, called through the fence later that morning. Her usual friendly smile was replaced with worry. People are saying all sorts of things, Charlie. At the local diner where they sometimes had breakfast, the usual warm greetings turned to whispers and sidelong glances. The waitress who always gave Charlie extra bacon couldn't meet his eyes as she took their order. Don't let them get to you, Kelsey said fiercely, watching Charlie's hands tighten around his coffee cup. But it was getting harder to ignore. Richard's smear campaign was spreading like wildfire through their small town. Parents at the grocery store pulled their children closer when Charlie walked by. The auto parts store owner, who'd known Charlie for years, suddenly couldn't find the parts he needed. That evening, Charlie sat on his porch, staring at the sunset. The weight of the past few days pressed down on him like a physical thing. Kelsey joined him, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. Maybe, she started hesitantly, maybe we should just give up. Let them have the money. It's not worth what they're doing to you. Charlie turned to look at her, seeing the guilt and worry in her young face. He thought about his daughter Jessie, about all the times he'd given up when things got tough. Not this time. Listen here, kid, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Your mother fought for you until her last breath. She didn't give up, and neither will we. But everyone thinks dash. Let them think what they want, Charlie interrupted. People who judge without knowing the whole story aren't worth worrying about. The truth is, I've made plenty of mistakes in my life. But taking you in, fighting for what's rightfully yours, that's not one of them. Kelsey's eyes filled with tears. I just don't want you to get hurt because of me. Charlie put his arm around her shoulders, something that would have felt awkward just weeks ago, but now felt natural. We're family, kid. Maybe not the kind people write happy stories about, but we're all we've got. And family fights for each other. The afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows of Charlie's living room, where papers and documents were spread across every surface. For weeks, Charlie and Kelsey had been drowning in legal paperwork, each day bringing new disappointments and dead ends. Kelsey sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by stacks of old files from her mother's office. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and dark circles under her eyes showed the toll of their endless searching. Charlie watched her from his worn leather armchair, his own exhaustion evident in the slump of his shoulders. "I don't know how much more of this I can take," Kelsey sighed, rubbing her eyes. She picked up another manila envelope, this one yellowed with age. Charlie grunted in agreement, taking a long sip of his coffee. "Your mother kept everything. There's got to be something in all this mess that can help us." As Kelsey opened the envelope, several photographs slipped out. She gathered them up, then suddenly froze. "Charlie," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Look at this." Charlie leaned forward as Kelsey handed him a photo. It showed Richard at what appeared to be a business meeting, dated just weeks before Jesse's death. But it wasn't Richard that caught their attention. It was the document clearly visible on the table in front of him. "That's Mom's will," Kelsey said, her voice rising with excitement. She grabbed her mother's actual will from a nearby stack and held it up. "See? The same letterhead, the same format. But look at the date." Charlie squinted at the photo, then at the will. "This photo shows Richard with your mother's will before she even signed it." His weathered face broke into a rare smile. He knew what was in it before she did. "But how is that possible?" Kelsey asked, her hands shaking as she examined the photo more closely. "It's not possible," Charlie replied, his voice growing stronger. Unless he had it drawn up himself," Kelsey finished, her eyes widening with realization. They spent the next hour examining the photo in detail, noting every person present in that meeting. Charlie recognized several of Richard's business associates, including the lawyer who had handled Jesse's will. "This proves they planned it," Charlie said, his voice rough with emotion. "They set your mother up, made her sign a will they had already prepared." Kelsey's hands balled into fists. "They manipulated her when she was sick, didn't they? When she was too weak to fight back." Charlie nodded grimly. "And this photo is dated exactly 3 weeks before she passed, when she was in the hospital for that routine surgery." They found more photos in the envelope, each one telling part of the story. There was Richard meeting with his lawyers, documentation of bank transfers, and even a glimpse of the trust fund paperwork before it had been officially filed. "Mom must have known something was wrong," Kelsey said softly, touching one of the photos. "That's why she kept these hidden." Charlie pulled out his phone and dialed Marcus, their lawyer. After a brief conversation, he turned to Kelsey with a determined look in his eyes. "Marcus says this is exactly what we needed. These photos prove premeditation and fraud. They show Richard and his lawyers planned to manipulate your mother's will before she even got sick." For the first time in weeks, Kelsey smiled, a real, hopeful smile that reached her eyes. "We can win this, can't we?" Charlie reached out and squeezed her shoulder. "You bet we can, kid. Your mother left us the ammunition we needed. Now we just need to use it right." The courtroom felt impossibly small as Charlie and Kelsey sat side by side on the wooden bench. The air was thick with tension, and the morning light streaming through the tall windows cast long shadows across the polished floor. Richard sat at the opposite table, his expensive suit and perfectly combed hair a stark contrast to Charlie's worn leather jacket and Kelsey's simple dress. Their lawyer, Marcus, stood before Judge Harrison, holding up the damning photographs they had discovered. His voice carried clearly through the hushed courtroom. "Your Honor, these photographs clearly show Mr. Richard Mace viewing and discussing his late wife's will 3 weeks before she signed it, while she was critically ill in the hospital." Marcus gestured to the enlarged photos displayed on an easel. "Note the date stamp in the corner, Your Honor. This meeting took place when Mrs. Jessie Mace was undergoing what was supposed to be routine surgery." Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair as Marcus continued. "Furthermore, we have evidence that Mr. Mace and his associates drafted this will themselves, presenting it to Mrs. Mace when she was too weak to fully understand its implications." Kelsey gripped Charlie's hand tightly as they watched the judge examine the photographs. Judge Harrison's expression remained neutral, but her eyes narrowed as she studied each piece of evidence. Richard's lawyer jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, these photographs could have been taken at any time. They prove nothing about the legitimacy of Mrs. Mace's will. If I may, Your Honor, Marcus responded, producing another document. We also have bank records showing suspicious transfers from Mr. Mace's accounts to several offshore holdings, beginning just days after these photos were taken. The amounts match exactly with what would have been Miss Kelsey's trust fund inheritance. Charlie watched as Richard's composed facade began to crack. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his perfectly pressed collar suddenly seemed too tight. Judge Harrison leaned forward, her stern gaze fixed on Richard. Mr. Mace, these photographs and financial records paint a very disturbing picture. Would you care to explain why you were reviewing your wife's will before she had even signed it? Richard stammered, his usual confidence crumbling. Your Honor, I was simply trying to protect my family's interests. By defrauding your own daughter, the judge interrupted, her voice sharp. The courtroom fell silent. Kelsey's grip on Charlie's hand tightened even more. Charlie could feel her trembling beside him, and he gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. Judge Harrison shuffled through the papers before her, then sat back in her chair. Her expression was stern as she surveyed the courtroom. Having reviewed all the evidence presented, I find clear and convincing proof of fraudulent activity in the handling of Jessie Mace's will and her daughter's trust fund. She turned her attention directly to Richard. Your actions, Mr. Mace, show a calculated attempt to deprive your daughter of her rightful inheritance. Kelsey's breath caught in her throat. Charlie sat perfectly still, his weathered face tense with anticipation. Therefore, Judge Harrison continued, I hereby rule that the will signed by Jessie Mace during her hospitalization is null and void. Full control of Kelsey Mace's trust fund is to be returned to her immediately, with Mr. Charlie Mace acting as trustee until she reaches legal age. The tension in Kelsey's body released all at once. Tears sprang to her eyes as she turned to Charlie, throwing her arms around his neck. Charlie held her close, his own eyes glistening with emotion as relief washed over them both. Across the courtroom, Richard slumped in his chair, his perfectly crafted world crumbling around him. But neither Charlie nor Kelsey paid him any attention. They had won. After all their fighting, all their searching, justice had finally prevailed. The late afternoon sun painted long shadows across the Montana landscape as Charlie's weathered pickup truck rumbled down the familiar dirt road leading to his cabin. Kelsey sat in the passenger seat, her head resting against the window, watching the golden light filter through the pine trees. The leather briefcase, containing all their legal documents, lay secure between them, a physical reminder of their victory. Charlie pulled up to the cabin and cut the engine. For a moment, neither of them moved, letting the peaceful silence of their surroundings wash over them. The constant tension that had been their companion for months finally began to ease. Can't believe it's really over, Kelsey said softly, running her fingers over the briefcase. Charlie nodded, his rough features softening. Let's head inside, kiddo. Think we both could use a breather. Inside the cabin, Charlie went straight to the kitchen and pulled out 2 bottles of root beer from the fridge, their celebration drink of choice since Kelsey had moved in. The cabin looked different now than it had months ago. Kelsey's school books were scattered on the coffee table, and colorful throw pillows brightened up the worn leather couch. Small changes that had transformed Charlie's bachelor pad into a real home. They settled onto the couch, and Charlie handed Kelsey her root beer. The ceiling fan whirred quietly above them, stirring the warm air. You know, Kelsey began, fiddling with a bottle cap. When Mom died, I thought I'd lost everything. My whole world just fell apart. She took a small sip, gathering her thoughts. And then when I found out about Dad and the trust fund, it felt like losing her all over again. Like everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. Charlie shifted uncomfortably and used such open conversation, but he knew Kelsey needed to talk. Your mama, he cleared his throat. She made mistakes. We all did. But she loved you something fierce, Kelsey. That wasn't a lie. I know that now, Kelsey said, turning to face him. And I think I understand her better too. She was trying to protect me, even if she didn't always know how. She paused, her eyes growing watery. Just like you've been protecting me. Charlie's throat tightened with emotion. He took a long drink from his root beer, buying time to steady his voice. Ain't nothing I wouldn't do for you, kid. Should have been there more before. For both you and your mama. But you're here now, Kelsey said firmly. Her voice grew quieter as she added, you're more of a father than Richard ever was. Even with all your scary tattoos and that crazy beard. A surprised laugh escaped Charlie, rough and genuine. He reached over and squeezed her shoulder, his large hand gentle despite its strength. These past months, Kelsey continued, learning all this stuff about my family, about Dad's lies, about Mom's struggles. It's been hard. Really hard. She set her root beer down and pulled her knees up to her chest. But you know what? I think I needed to learn it. Because now I know that family isn't just about who you're born to. It's about who stands by you when things get tough. Charlie's eyes grew misty as he watched his granddaughter, seeing traces of Jessie in her determined expression, but also something uniquely Kelsey, a strength that was all her own. Never thought I'd say this, she said with a small smile, but I'm glad you're my family, Charlie. My real family. The knock on the cabin door came just as Charlie was finishing up the dishes for breakfast. Kelsey looked up from her homework at the kitchen table, her pencil pausing mid-equation. Through the window, they could see Richard's expensive black SUV parked in the gravel driveway, looking out of place among the pine needles and dirt. Charlie dried his hands on a dish towel, his weathered face tightening. Wanting to send him away, Kelsey shook her head slowly. No, I think we should hear what he has to say. Charlie opened the door to find Richard standing there, but not the Richard they'd faced in court. Gone was the crisp suit and commanding presence. Instead, he wore jeans and a plain button-down shirt. His shoulders were slumped, and dark circles lingered under his eyes. "May I come in?" Richard asked, his usual confidence notably absent. Charlie stepped aside, watching Richard carefully as he entered. Kelsey remained at the kitchen table, her geometry homework forgotten. Richard cleared his throat, looking around the humble cabin. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see right now." "You got that right," Charlie muttered, but there was less bite in his words than usual. Richard nodded, accepting the hostility. He turned to Kelsey, his hands fidgeting with his car keys. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since the court ruling. About the kind of father I've been. The kind of person I've become." Kelsey sat perfectly still, her face guarded, but listening. "I was wrong," Richard continued, his voice cracking slightly. "About everything. The trust fund, the way I treated you after your mother died, the years I spent chasing money instead of being there for my daughter." He swallowed hard. "I let greed and my family's influence corrupt me. I forgot what really mattered." Charlie leaned against the wall, arms crossed, but watching intently as Richard stepped closer to Kelsey. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Richard said. "I don't deserve it, but I want you to know how deeply sorry I am for everything I've put you through. You deserve better from me. You deserved a father who showed up, who protected you, who put you first." He glanced at Charlie. "And I'm grateful that when I failed to be that person, someone else stepped up." Kelsey's hands trembled slightly as she pushed back from the table. "You hurt me," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "You chose money over me, over Mom." "I know," Richard whispered, tears gathering in his eyes. "I know I did, and I'll regret that choice for the rest of my life." The cabin fell silent except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Kelsey stood up slowly, crossing her arms in a gesture that mirrored Charlie's protective stance. "I accept your apology," she said finally. "But that doesn't fix everything. Trust isn't something you can just win back with words." Richard nodded quickly. "Of course. I understand. I hope maybe, with time, you might let me try to earn back a place in your life. Even if it's just a small one." Kelsey looked at Charlie, drawing strength from his steady presence, before turning back to her father. "We could try. Slowly. But things will never be the same as before." "That's more than I deserve," Richard said softly. "Thank you." The morning sun streamed through the cabin windows, casting warm patches of light across the kitchen table where college brochures lay scattered. Kelsey sat cross-legged in her chair, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail as she flipped through the glossy pages. Charlie stood at the counter, pouring 2 mugs of coffee. "What about this one?" Kelsey held up a brochure featuring a sprawling campus. University of Montana. It's only 3 hours away. Charlie brought over the coffee mugs, setting one in front of her. Decent engineering program there, he said, pulling up a chair. Your math grades are good enough. Yeah, but Kelsey's fingers traced the edge of the brochure. There's also Stanford and MIT. She bit her lip. With the trust fund, I could go anywhere now. Charlie's weathered face softened as he watched his granddaughter. The past few months had changed her. Gone was the scared, angry girl from the shelter. In her place sat a young woman starting to believe in herself again. You could, he agreed, taking a sip of his coffee. World's wide open for you now, kid. Kelsey set down the brochure and wrapped her hands around her mug. I've been thinking about it a lot, she said quietly. About what I want to do. Charlie waited, giving her space to find her words. The kitchen clock ticked softly in the background. Everyone always had plans for me, she continued. Dad wanted me in business school. Mom pushed for law. The trust fund was supposed to make all that happen. She looked up at Charlie. But nobody ever asked what I wanted. And what do you want? Charlie's voice was gentle. I want to stay here, Kelsey said, the words coming out in a rush. Just for a while. Maybe take some classes at the community college first. Figure things out. She hesitated. If that's okay with you? Charlie's coffee mug paused halfway to his lips. Here? With your old grandpa? You're the only one who's ever really been straight with me, Kelsey said. Who didn't want anything from me except. She swallowed hard. Except for me to be okay. Charlie set down his mug, his throat tight. This place ain't exactly fancy, he said gruffly, gesturing at the modest cabin. Not like what you used to. I don't need fancy, Kelsey replied. I need family. Real family. She reached across the table and put her hand over his tattooed one. You're all I have left who actually cares about me. Not my trust fund, not my future connections. Just me. Charlie looked down at their hands, his large and rough, hers small and smooth, and felt something shift in his chest. All those years of regret, of wondering if he'd failed Jessie, seemed to soften just a bit. Well, he said, clearing his throat, guess we better clean out that spare room properly then. Make it feel more like home. Kelsey's smile lit up her whole face. Really? You mean it? Of course I do, Charlie said. Been kind of nice having you around. Even if you do use up all the hot water. Kelsey laughed, the sound bright and clear in the morning sunshine. She got up and hugged Charlie, surprising him. After a moment, his arms came up to hold her close. The college brochures lay forgotten on the table as grandfather and granddaughter sat together, planning their future, not the one others had chosen for them, but the one they were building together, one day at a time. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cemetery as Charlie's truck rumbled to a stop along the gravel path. Kelsey sat quietly in the passenger seat, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers she'd gathered from the meadow near their cabin. The same kind that used to grow in Jessie's garden when Kelsey was little. You ready? Charlie asked, his voice gentler than usual. Kelsey nodded, though her knuckles were white around the flower stems. Together, they walked between the rows of headstones until they reached Jessie's grave. It was simple, a gray marble marker with her name and dates etched in clean lines. Charlie hung back as Kelsey knelt to place the flowers. She traced her mother's name with trembling fingers, remembering the woman who had tried so hard to protect her, even if her methods had sometimes caused more harm than good. I used to be so angry with her, Kelsey said softly, for changing the will, for not telling me what was really going on. She brushed away a fallen leaf from the stone. But now I think maybe she was just scared. Charlie shifted his weight, his boots crunching on the grass. Your mother. He paused, choosing his words carefully. She carried a lot of fear with her. Fear of not measuring up. Fear of losing you to that family's influence. He shook his head. Sometimes fear makes people do things that don't make sense to anyone else. Like you staying away all those years. Kelsey asked, looking up at him. Charlie's weathered face creased with old pain. Yeah, like that. He moved closer, standing beside Kelsey. I was afraid too. Afraid I'd mess things up worse than I already had. Kelsey stood, brushing dirt from her jeans. Mom never stopped talking about you, you know. Even when she was mad, She'd tell stories about how you used to take her camping, teach her to fix engines. A ghost of a smile crossed Charlie's face. She was a natural with machines. Could tear down a carburetor by the time she was 12. She wanted that kind of life for me, Kelsey said. Freedom to choose. That's why she put all those conditions on the trust fund. She touched the headstone again. She just went about it the wrong way. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, casting a warm glow over the cemetery. A light breeze stirred the wildflowers, carrying their sweet scent through the air. I think, Kelsey continued, she'd be happy now. Seeing us together, fixing things. Charlie put his arm around Kelsey's shoulders, and she leaned into him. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the shadows lengthen across Jesse's grave. The anger and confusion that had brought them here was finally beginning to fade, replaced by understanding and acceptance. You ready to head home? Charlie asked after a while. Kelsey nodded, taking one last look at her mother's grave. Yeah, she said. I'm ready. As they walked back to the truck, their footsteps fell into an easy rhythm. The weight of the past felt lighter somehow, as if they'd left something behind among the wildflowers and stone markers. Not their memories of Jesse, but the pain that had surrounded them for so long. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Charlie's cabin as Kelsey packed her school supplies into a new backpack. Her old private school uniform had been replaced with regular clothes, jeans, and a comfortable sweater that felt more like her than the stuffy blazers ever did. Charlie sat at the kitchen table, papers spread out before him. His reading glasses, perched on his nose, made him look oddly sophisticated despite his rough appearance. The stack of legal documents in front of him represented months of work with their lawyer to create an ironclad trust. You sure about this? Charlie looked up at Kelsey. Regular public school's going to be different from what you're used to. Kelsey zipped up her backpack. I'm sure. I don't need fancy uniforms or stuck-up classmates anymore. She smiled, something that came easier these days. Besides, it's closer to home. Home. The word felt right now, even in this small cabin with its creaky floors and temperamental heating. Charlie nodded, turning back to the papers. His pen scratched across the signature lines as he finalized the new trust arrangement. Once I sign these, he said, nobody can touch your money except you. Not your father, not his family, not even me. He paused, his weathered hand steady as he initialed another page. It'll all be waiting for you when you turn 21. Kelsey walked over to the table, peering at the documents. The legal language was complex, but the intent was clear. Her future would be protected, truly hers to control when the time came. What about Richard's latest complaint? She asked, referring to her father's last-ditch attempt to challenge their victory in court. Charlie's face hardened. Let him try. Judge Thompson already shut down his appeal. These papers here, he tapped the stack with his finger. They're the final nail in the coffin. Even if he wanted to, he couldn't get near your trust fund now. The kitchen clock ticked steadily as Charlie worked through the remaining pages. Kelsey watched him, noting how different he looked from the scary biker who had picked her up from the shelter all those months ago. He was still intimidating to others, sure, but to her, he was just Charlie, her protector, her grandfather, her family. There, Charlie said finally, signing the last page with a flourish. Done. He carefully organized the papers into a folder, then pushed back from the table. Want to grab breakfast at May's before school? Those chocolate chip pancakes you like. Really? Kelsey brightened. But it's a school day. Special occasion. Charlie shrugged. Not every day, we finally tell those vultures to take a permanent hike. They headed out to Charlie's truck, the folder tucked safely in Kelsey's backpack. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and approaching autumn. As they drove down the familiar dirt road, Kelsey noticed how the tension had eased from Charlie's shoulders. The battle that had consumed their lives was finally, truly over. At a red light, Charlie turned to her. You know, your mom would be proud of how you handled all this. Standing your ground, not letting them push you around. I learned from the best, Kelsey replied, giving him a knowing look. The light turned green, and they continued toward town in comfortable silence. The trust fund was secure, school was starting, and for the first time in a long while, they could both breathe easy. The morning stretched before them, full of possibility rather than dread. The aroma of garlic and herbs filled Charlie's small kitchen as he and Kelsey worked side by side, preparing dinner. Outside, the Montana sunset painted the sky in soft oranges and purples, casting a warm glow through the windows. Charlie chopped vegetables with surprising precision for someone with such large hands, while Kelsey stirred a pot of homemade sauce on the stove. "Remember when you first tried to cook for me?" Kelsey asked, a smile playing at her lips. "That burnt mess you called scrambled eggs?" Charlie's gruff laugh filled the kitchen. "Hey now, I've gotten better." He scraped the diced onions into the pan. "Besides, you weren't exactly a master chef yourself back then. What was that thing you tried to make? The mac and cheese that came out like soup. That was not my fault." Kelsey protested, but she was laughing too. The box directions were weird. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, moving around each other with the ease of people who had learned each other's rhythms. Charlie reached for the garlic bread in the oven just as Kelsey stepped aside, a dance they perfected over months of sharing this small space. "You know," Charlie said, setting the bread on the counter to cool, "when I first got that call about you being in the shelter, I was terrified." He paused his chopping, looking at her seriously. "Didn't know the first thing about taking care of a teenager." Kelsey lowered the heat under the sauce, turning to face him. "And I was scared of you," she admitted. "This big, scary biker guy with tattoos everywhere. Mom used to tell me stories about your Hells Angels days." "But they weren't good stories," Charlie said quietly. "No." Kelsey stirred the sauce thoughtfully. "But she always said you had a good heart underneath it all." "Guess she was right about that." Charlie cleared his throat, clearly moved, but trying not to show it. He busied himself with setting the small kitchen table, the one they'd fixed together after finding it at a yard sale. The wobbly leg still had the piece of wood they'd wedged under it that first night. "Hard to believe it's all over now," Kelsey said, testing the sauce with a spoon. "The court battles, the trust fund drama, everything with Richard and his family. Worth every minute of it," Charlie replied, his voice firm. "Every lawyer meeting, every nasty look from those fancy folks who thought they could push us around. They brought the food to the table, a simple meal of spaghetti, garlic bread, and salad. Nothing fancy, but made with care." As they sat down, Kelsey noticed the family photo she'd hung on the wall months ago, the one of her mom as a teenager, standing next to a younger Charlie. They were both smiling in the picture, a rare snapshot of happier times. "You know what's funny?" Kelsey said, twirling pasta onto her fork. "When this all started, I thought getting that trust fund back was the most important thing in the world. Like it would somehow fix everything that was wrong in my life." Charlie looked up from his plate, his eyes soft despite his rough exterior. "Money's important, kid. Won't pretend it's not. But it's not everything." "No," Kelsey agreed, thinking about the months they'd spent fighting together, learning to trust each other, building something neither of them had expected. "It's definitely not everything." The evening light streamed through the kitchen window, warming the simple scene. Their plates steamed, the garlic bread filled the air with its comforting smell, and in that moment, both Charlie and Kelsey knew they'd gained something far more valuable than any trust fund could provide. The thick envelope lay on Charlie's kitchen table, its prestigious letterhead gleaming in the morning light. Kelsey's hands trembled as she held it, her acceptance letter to Stanford University still feeling surreal even after reading it for the 10th time. Charlie stood by the counter, trying to hide his proud smile behind his coffee mug. His weathered face softened as he watched his granddaughter, remembering the broken teenager who had shown up at that homeless shelter just over a year ago. Now here she was, ready to take on the world. "Full scholarship," Kelsey said, shaking her head in disbelief. "They said my essay about overcoming adversity really stood out." She looked up at Charlie, her eyes bright. "I wrote about us, you know, about how you taught me what real family means." Charlie set down his mug, clearing his throat to hide his emotion. "Well," he said gruffly, "you did all the hard work. I just gave you a place to stay." "That's not true, and you know it." Kelsey stood up, crossing the small kitchen to hug him. Charlie stiffened for a moment. Even after all this time, displays of affection still caught him off guard, but then he wrapped his arms around her. "You fought for me when no one else would," she continued, her voice muffled against his shirt. You believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. The morning sun streamed through the window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. Outside, Charlie's motorcycle gleamed in the driveway, recently polished for their weekend rides together. The walls of the small cabin were now covered with photos, some old, some new, telling the story of their unconventional family. "Remember when you taught me to ride?" Kelsey laughed, pulling back from the hug. "I was so scared, but you just kept saying, 'Trust yourself, kid. You're stronger than you think.'" Charlie nodded, a rare full smile breaking through his usual stern expression. "And now look at you. Stanford-bound. Gonna be some fancy lawyer someday, making sure other kids don't get their trust fund stolen." "That's the plan." Kelsey ran her fingers over the acceptance letter again. "But I'm coming home for breaks. Someone needs to make sure you don't burn down the kitchen." "Hey now," Charlie protested, but his eyes twinkled. "I make a mean scrambled egg these days." They moved to the porch, settling into the mismatched chairs they'd restored together. The Montana mountains stretched out before them, unchanged and eternal. Charlie watched as Kelsey pulled out her phone to take another picture of her acceptance letter. "You know," she said, lowering the phone, "when Mom died, I thought I'd lost my whole family. I never expected." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "I never expected to find a better one." Charlie felt his throat tighten. He remembered the countless nights spent poring over legal documents, the confrontations with Richard's family, the small victories and setbacks that had brought them here. The trust fund battle had been won, but the real victory was sitting right beside him. "You're going to do great things, kid," he said softly. "Your mom will be proud." "She'd be proud of both of us," Kelsey replied, reaching over to squeeze his hand. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher over the mountains. The acceptance letter lay in Kelsey's lap, a symbol not just of her academic achievement, but of everything they'd overcome together. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.